everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer. I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. Human beings are talkers. We talk, and we talk, and we talk. We gab, we gossip, we schmooze, we blab. Now, thanks to modern technology, we don't even need to use our mouths and vocal cords to talk. We have an insatiable amount of social media options to satisfy our need to talk in one way or another. It can be through videos or words or emojis or another dozen things that I'm not even aware of. There may not even be anyone listening to our talking, but we continue to talk nevertheless. We don't know how long things have been like this with people. Were people talking this incessantly 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago? Nobody really knows the answer to this question. Language has probably been our most valuable tool that we acquired in our long evolutionary history. Fire in the wheel and a few other things have played major roles in our ability to survive, but they pale in comparison to language. It gave us the ability to share our thoughts with others in a highly complex manner that ultimately stimulated the human mind to attainments that would have been impossible if we had all remained restricted to our own minds. Language made individuals into a collective, and the rest is history. It is somewhat surprising with this need to talk and the great benefits that communication has bestowed onto our legacy that we have a parallel need for silence. Everyone has this need, even the biggest blabbers amongst us. It seems to express some inner urge to want to simply be alone with one's own thoughts. Sometimes talking and communication gets in the way of this inner need. Silence is frequently the method of choice for prayer, for meditation, for deep thought on almost everything, and for everyday reflection on just about anything. Many people find that sometimes the best way to communicate with each other is to be silent. Like the proverbial picture, a look or a gesture may be better than 1,000 words. This week's Parsha is called Shemini. That word means eighth, and it refers to the eighth day of the dedication ceremonies of the tabernacle, the narrative of which began in the previous Parsha. There are various requisite offerings that one comes to expect from biblical ceremonies like this, all done with proper rituals and precision. There is meat and blood and guts, and even some grain offerings and blessings from the priests. Finally, after it was all done, everyone beheld the dramatic appearance of God's glory. Towards the end of all this, something strange happens that seems to go off script just a little. It happens so innocuously that it seems almost expected. The key quote goes like this: "The two sons of Aaron, who was the high priest, Nadav and Avihu, each took a fire pan and placed upon it a fire, and then placed incense on it. And they brought before God a strange fire that God had not commanded them. Then a fire came forth from before God and consumed them, and they died before God. Moshe said to Aaron, 'This is what God spoke. I will be sanctified by those who are close to me, and in the presence of all the people I will be glorified.' And Aaron was silent." End of quote. What follows this brief but extremely dramatic event is Moshe telling Aaron's cousins to remove the corpses from the sanctuary. Then Moshe instructs Aaron and his remaining two sons that they must not let their hair grow wild or tear their garments, both of which are signs of mourning. Nor should they leave the confines of the tabernacle. The rest of the Israelites would take up the burden of mourning the dead, but they, as the remaining priests, had to perform their essential tasks for the dedication ceremony. This really is the end of this little incident. It is easy to miss among all the offerings and on the rest of the rituals and laws that make up this relatively short parsha. The whole incident only takes 7 verses, with the real drama happening in the first 3. Somebody zipping through this parsha could very well be unaware of anything really bizarre taking place here. But once it gets noticed, it is difficult to ignore. What was this all about? Was there something wrong with this fire offering these two sons of Aaron brought? Whatever it was, why was it necessary for them to die for it? And assuming there are answers to these questions, what is that little interjection in the middle of all this that Aaron, quote, was silent after Moshe told him what had really happened? It turns out that there are many different answers put forward by the Bible commentaries over the centuries as to what really happened here. Perhaps the simplest is to read the verses exactly as they say. The problem with this fire offering was that it hadn't been commanded by God. This alone was the crux of the matter. These offerings, as antiquated as we may think them to be, had to be done correctly and exactly. If anything was off, the whole ceremony, with all its sanctity, would be ruined. This was the bottom line of all this. These two priests, for whatever reason, decided to add their own offering on top of the requisite offerings. As well-meaning as they may have been, this was a huge problem. If this type of thing was allowed, the tabernacle and the temple that followed it and all the rituals would be a free-for-all with anybody who wanted to do things their own way, changing the holy procedures until it was completely out of sync with what was supposed to be. This is what happened here, and it had to be nipped in the bud. Assuming we can accept that this as an explanation, and assuming we can accept that it was necessary for them to die for this blatant attempt to go off program, then perhaps we can go to the next issue of Aaron's silence. Why did the Torah stick that short phrase in there? Does it really add anything to say that Aaron didn't say anything in response to Moshe? To attempt to answer this question, we have to understand what it was that Moshe said to Aaron to begin with. Obviously, this was a huge deal. This unexpected offering and the dramatic and tragic deaths that followed. Moshe's reaction to it was to tell his brother Aaron that this was something that in some way was foreseen. God had in some manner already spoken about this with this mysterious statement of, quote, "I will be sanctified by those who are close to me, and in the presence of all the people I will be glorified." That statement, which doesn't actually appear anywhere earlier in the Torah, is the key. What it appears to mean is that sanctification of God takes place through those who are already close to God. And when that happens, God will in some way be glorified. We may normally associate sanctification with peaceful and pleasant ceremonies or actions. It is difficult to come to terms with sanctification being associated with something tragic or even violent. But this was not necessarily the case in biblical times. The Bible didn't have the modern qualms of seeing tragedy as the antithesis of holiness. Sometimes, perhaps surprisingly, they can work together and in harmony. This apparently was such a case. The death of Aaron's sons for their ill-fated attempt at attempting their own personal contribution to the required ceremony was a way of declaring the absolute holiness of that ceremony and the divine reality that it was meant to glorify. This was serious business and not some haphazard anything-goes ritual. The sanctity was established by demonstrating that it had to be done exactly as required. It was only because Aaron's sons were already close to God that they brought their extra offering. But it was that closeness that sealed their fate. With all that in mind, we can now attempt to understand the last little tidbit of all this, Aaron's silence. Who cares that he was silent? He heard what Moshe said. He didn't say anything. Why is it necessary to emphasize that he was silent? What do we gain by knowing that this was his reaction? This one is actually easier to answer than all the other questions we have dealt with on these few verses. If the Torah had said nothing about Aaron's reaction, we really wouldn't know what it was. Perhaps he was resentful, perhaps he was angry, or perhaps he had no reaction at all. But what did happen, we are told, is that he was silent. Whatever thoughts were going on in his head, which we are not told what they were, didn't escape his lips. This alone is highly significant. This is worthy of being noted in the Bible. Aaron was silent. It is all too often that people feel the need or urge to voice whatever it is they are feeling. If anything, this has become something of an act of bravery or defiance in modern times. Perhaps it has always been this way, but there are times that such a display of one's inner feelings may not be necessary or called for. There are times when the best reaction to something is to overcome the natural urge to blurt something out or to complain or scream or cry, and to simply let things lie hidden in the privacy of the mind. While many people may object to this advice in general, and while it may not be the best response in certain situations, there are times when silence is truly golden. Not every thought has to be spoken. Not every complaint has to be lodged. Not every emotion has to be voiced. As difficult as it may be at times, there are situations in which silence is the best response. What message does silence impart when a person has no wish to tell others what they have on their mind? For one thing, it lets those others know that whatever it is that person is thinking, it is their own private thoughts, and for whatever reason, they would prefer to keep things that way, at least at the moment. This alone is of great value. Not everything is meant to be public knowledge. There is no law of the universe that every little or big thing going on in your head has to be shared with the world. While this may break the cardinal rule of modern social media, it may nevertheless be God's honest truth. It can happen that precisely this message can speak more powerfully than screaming one's message from the rooftops. Silence, contrary to modern popular opinion, is one of the few truly free will acts we have left in our diminishing repertoire of choices. Our voices are all too often nothing more than echoes of what is currently in vogue, or just blurting out the first thing that comes to mind with no thought given to what we are actually saying. A well-considered silence speaks volumes and drowns out the endless verbiage to which we are constantly subjected. It is the individual's way of saying to others and to themselves that what I have in my mind is mine, and for whatever reason, I would like it to stay that way. Shabbat Shalom.